Hey y'all, I'm Lauren and welcome to Cantina Cast. Today I'm talking about the new novel Jedi Battle Scars by Sam Maggs. I did release a video a few days ago with a sneak peek of my first impressions from the book, but now that the book has been released as of today, I'm going to talk a lot more in depth about my views on the book, kind of like my experience reading it and getting into some more plot details. At the beginning of this video, I'll still give my sort of general thoughts without spoilers. So that way, if you haven't read it yet and you're planning to, you can kind of get a sense of what the book is about. But then I'll warn you once I'm about to start talking spoilers. So that way, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, you'll know going into it. This book follows Cal Kestis and the rest of the Stinger Mantis crew, and the events are following the video game that came out in 2019 called Jedi Fallen Order. So if you've played Jedi Fallen Order, you're already going to be familiar with who this book is following. But if you haven't played Jedi Fallen Order, don't let that stop you because you still really get to know the characters in this book, even if this is your first time meeting them. And this book, it's meant to be like the midpoint between the Jedi Fallen Order game and the Jedi Survivor game that's going to be coming out in a few weeks. So it's kind of like, it sounds like in between those two games, we do have a little bit of a time jump. And so this novel is covering the events that we missed in between those two games. And so at the opening of this book, Cal is still with the Stinger Mantis crew. They're still taking on really any job that they can find that they feel is going to be something that's going to make things more difficult for the Empire. So they're really kind of doing anything that comes their way. And in some ways this is going well, and in some ways it's starting to cause some friction in the group. And so one of the things that is changing amongst the group is that during the events of this book, they do have a new member join them who is a stormtrooper that is deserting. And this stormtrooper tells them, I have some information for y'all that might be useful. And they have to decide if they're going to take the stormtrooper up on what she has to offer. And this is risky because if they do go through with what she's telling them, there's a real chance that they could run into the Inquisitor, the fifth brother. So it's kind of like they're being put in a situation right at the start of the book where they have to decide if they're going to trust someone that they really don't know. And so just my very general thoughts on the book. Sam Maggs, I really did like her writing style. I liked it how the way that she gets into the character's head, despite the book being in third person, it still helps you really get to know those characters very quickly. That's why I was saying earlier that even if you didn't play Jedi Fallen Order, I still really have every confidence that by the end of this book, you're going to know these characters just as well as if you had played the game. And getting to know those characters so quickly, it does really enhance that found family element that's in this book as well. And this book also is a really great introduction to the character Cal Kestis. If you never played the game, but you're curious to learn more about this character, one thing I said in my first video that I made on this book is that I know that I feel like a lot of times with various Star Wars TV shows that are coming out, when people are starting to have speculation on what characters might show up, I feel like Cal Kestis's name is a name that I hear a lot. And so if you've also heard that and you're wondering who Cal is, but you never played the games, this is a good way to get to know that character and kind of understand who he is and where he fits and everything, even if you don't really feel like you want to invest the time in the games. It also sounds like, too, if you are into the games, I got the impression that this book is going to be key information that you're probably going to want to have going into the next game if you're interested in the storyline that's carrying through both of those games. If you hadn't read the book or you weren't familiar with the events going on in that book, there's a chance that you might end up in that game being like, well, what happened? How did we get here? Like, there's some things that are different now. And the book does kind of explain how some things change. But I mean, if the storyline of the game, if that's not really what interests you about the game, then you might not feel like you're missing anything. So I think that type of thing is just really up to the individual person as to whether that seems worth it for you. So overall, I did enjoyed the book. I feel like the value that I got from it is I really got to know these characters a lot better. As I'll start getting into the spoilers, there were a couple elements that didn't really work as well for me. So I'll mention what those are when I get to them. But as far as if we're talking about like the overall story and the overall impression that I got from the book, I would say that I had a great time reading it. I had a lot of fun. I just fell in love with Cal even more reading this book. So if you're interested in these characters, it's definitely going to be worth the read. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start talking spoilers. So if you haven't read the book yet and you are wanting to steer clear of spoilers, now is your warning. So the book opens when the Mantis crew is currently on a stealth mission. And you get the sense immediately that this is the kind of thing that they do all the time. This is a very standard day for them. They all have like their roles that they're doing and their pre-established expectations of how the mission's going to go, and it seems like it's just kind of like a normal day for them. On this mission we have Cal, and he is a former Jedi Padawan that survived Order 66. And one thing you learn about Cal through the course of the book, if you didn't know him already from playing the games, is that even though he's a Jedi, he is a little bit different than your typical Jedi just because of the fact that he grew up kind of like having to figure things out on his own and having to survive. So his perspective is very different. He's very much like about his priority is protecting the people that he cares about. But he also doesn't overdo it either. Like he'll do what needs to be done, but he's not just like a complete loose cannon or anything like that. And I feel like Cal is just such an easy character to fall in love with because he's very optimistic. He's very loving. When he cares about someone, he like puts his whole self into doing everything he can to help and protect that person. That loyalty that he has to his family, it stays strong throughout the whole book, and it's just very clear that that is always his top priority. And even when like there are some moments in the book where even if you don't really agree with the way that he's handling certain things or going about certain things, it's just so clear that his heart is in the right place that it's like it's hard to get frustrated with them. We also have Marin, who is a night sister from Dathomir, and Marin is pretty much constantly thinking about trying to get some sort of vengeance for the destruction of her home planet and for the loss of her sisters. I mean, this is on her mind pretty much every second of every day. Even though the separatists are no longer around at this point, she feels that the best way that she can get any sort of vengeance is by putting a thorn in the Empire's side as much as she can. And so her and Cal are pretty aligned in their goal of anything that we can do to make it harder for the Empire, we will consider taking on because that's our priority. We just make it hard. We want to make it harder for them. We want to make them struggle. We want them to lose property, soldiers, whatever it is. So her and Cal are very similar in like their ultimate goal as to how they feel like they need to go at the Empire. Even though they have this common goal, Marin and Cal are also very different because of course Marin is a dark side user as being a night sister and Cal as a Jedi. You know, those two groups aren't really supposed to get along, but they do seem to make it work. And this is kind of what I mean about how like Cal is just really easy to love as a character is because there's moments later on in the book where Marin assumes that Cal must just think that she's awful. And then you see inside Cal's head and you can see that he doesn't think that at all. And so I love their dynamic of how even though they're so different, they still have a common ground and they're still able to have a really great relationship. On the mission, we also have BD1, who is Cal's adorable droid. You have to have an adorable droid. We also have Sarah, who is Cal's current master. And in Jedi Fallen Order, one thing that we learn about Sarah is that she had a former Padawan who became an Inquisitor, and that is something that has stayed with her. Even if you didn't play Jedi Fallen Order, this book does a really good job of giving you the information that you need to know. So don't worry about like needing to have a bunch of background information like that because the book does mention it and explain it a couple of times, so you're still able to get up to speed. We also have Grease, who is the pilot of the ship, and out of the whole crew, he's the one that is really the most practical. He's the one that's most concerned about logistics, which I guess does make sense for a pilot. And there are times in this book where he's really trying to get the rest of the crew to think about these things in a more practical way and to start trying to think ahead towards the future instead of just only worrying about what the next mission is. And so the whole crew, they're all part of this first mission that we see when the book opens, and they're all doing their part that they usually would play in this type of a situation. And the mission that they're doing is they're currently trying to destroy the Haxian Brood's base. And the Haxian Brood is a crime syndicate that the Stinger Mantis crew has previously had issues with. But the mission does get tricky because when they get there, they see that there's a bunch of stormtroopers there because the Brood is working with the Empire. And so that complicates the mission and it's not quite so routine anymore. And so Marin and Cal are able to fight their way out. And this is like one of the many times in this book where you get to see how well these two work together, because even though they're so different in their approach, they kind of bounce off each other, and you can really see that without the other one being there, it would be way harder. I'm not saying that they couldn't do it without the other one, but it definitely wouldn't be the same if they weren't both helping each other out. And during this, Marin has an encounter with a stormtrooper who is deserting, and her name is Fret. And she shows up, and her and Marin, pretty much right off the bat, like even in this first encounter, they are very attracted to each other. And Fret begs Marin, take me with you. Like, I've heard so much great things about the Manus crew, and I want to leave. Like, I don't want to be part of the Empire anymore. And once Fret gets back to the ship, the rest of the crew, they all kind of have varying reactions. And again, coming back to like how much I love Cal. I feel like this whole video is just me talking about how much I love Cal. But anyway, the way that Cal reacts is he's very polite and welcoming to Fret from the get-go. He's very warm towards her, but on the inside, he is cautious about the situation. So he strikes like a really good balance between wanting to be kind to people and welcoming and not wanting to just make people like feel terrible and be rude and stuff. But on the inside, he is still very knowledgeable of, we need to be careful with people like this. Something about this doesn't really feel right. And I'm going to continue to be mindful of that situation while still being friendly and cordial toward her at the same time. Like, he's optimistic, but he's not stupid about it. And so even though they're all very apprehensive of Fret, considering the way that she showed up, she does kind of make some headway in earning their trust because she does help them outrun the Imperials when they're trying to get out of the base. And so even though she does help them, once Fret starts like explaining her backstory, there's different moments throughout the book where she's telling this like backstory of where she comes from and how she got involved with the Empire. And it starts getting kind of hard to follow. It's like she keeps kind of like changing it slightly. And so this is where I just kind of went into this like, I guess like the rest of the crew, I didn't trust Fret like from the start, and it it was hard for this character to win me over. And honestly, I don't really think this character ever did win me over. And this is kind of like at the beginning of the video when I was talking about certain things that didn't work as great for me as other things. The character of Fret, I pretty much never was on her side. And Marin, as I mentioned a minute ago, Marin is attracted to Fret pretty much immediately. Um, a lot of times this trope is called insta lust, where it's like Marin has this just like otherworldly attraction to Fret. Like, I think at one point in the book she does use the word cosmic. Like, and she like can't stop thinking about her. Like, she's a little obsessed with her, and it's just like one of those like magnetism attractions. And that's something else that also kind of had me putting my guard up too, is I was like, oh no, that doesn't feel good. Like, whenever it's too intensive an attraction, I'm like, this is gonna go bad. Like, it has to go bad at some point. There's gonna be consequences. So I just kind of was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. And as the reader, since we're kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, there were times that Marin's obsession with Fret, it did kind of start to lose me as well, because there were moments where Marin was putting her feelings about Fret above the rest of the crew. And shortly after joining the crew, Fret does tell them that she has a job for them if they want it. And as the group is discussing if they want to take the job or not, the cracks do start to show in that we're learning that a lot of the group has different motivations now. So Cal is still very much wanting to do anything that he can to frustrate or hinder the Empire in any way. Marin is also pretty much on the same page in her goal for vengeance that she has. We also learn that Sayre is her views are more concerned with leaving behind a legacy for the Jedi or for people for maybe even if the Jedi doesn't exist, like Force users or people who might still learn from the Jedi's teachings. So rather than trying to stop the Empire, she's actually trying to create something. And then we also learn that Grease pretty much, he kind of sounds like he just doesn't want to do this anymore at all. Like, he's thinking much more about the future and like, how long can we keep this up? Like, one of these days we're going to end up dead. Like, is that really what we want? Do we want to die doing this? And so this instance of this group kind of like butting heads over their different goals, this is just one of those instances that happens throughout the book. Like we have multiple points where they're all kind of like getting a little bit sideways in the fact that some of their goals are not aligning anymore in the same way that they used to. But despite their different views and despite the fact that they don't really end up coming to a solution in this conversation, they do at least agree to check the job out and just kind of try to learn more about it and then go from there. Fret leads them to Karis Lar, that's the guy that is needing someone to do the mission. And at the start, the mission does sound pretty good because this guy, he is very involved with rebel factions and helping financially support them. But it's kind of like the more they're talking to him, they start to kind of feel sketched out by him too. And so now it's like, this guy seems dishonest, and you can kind of tell that he's only putting his resources where he feels there's going to be a profit. Like he doesn't seem like he's truly invested in the rebel cause. It's more about like what's a good investment for me financially. So this is like kind of what I was saying with like I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop with Fret. This is something else that was kind of like adding to that is the fact that Fret says she has this great job for them, but then she brings them to this guy who feels like a not very trustworthy person. But what the job is that he needs them to do is there's this thing called the Shroud, and it's a piece of technology that, long story short, it would allow people to hide from the Empire. So, like a key example of somebody who could really use this would be a Force user who's on the run. And it also works the other way too, where if the Empire has the Shroud, then they would be able to track down anyone they want to track down. And it would just be really catastrophic. So Karis Lar wants them to go get this piece of tech so that way it can be in the hands of the rebels and not in the hands of the Empire. And the schematics for it are being kept in a prison on Mercana. And it's a time sensitive mission as well because the fifth brother is going to go pick up the schematics pretty soon. And so they need to beat him there and pick up the schematics and bring them back to Karis. Then we get back to the ship and there's more debate about if they're going to do this job or not. And in all of this kind of like back and forth, second guessing of Fret and all of this, Cal decides to use his psychometry on Fret's armor. And he doesn't really like premeditate it, but he's just sitting there thinking to himself, and then he sees her armor and it's kind of like right there, so he kind of can't resist. So he wasn't trying to be he wasn't trying to invade the privacy, but I mean, come on, it's like right there and she's already been a little questionable from the start. So like how could you not, right? I will defend any action that Cal takes apparently. So don't mind me. So when he does the psychometry, he sees a vision of Fret with her ex girlfriend, who, based on the emotions that were coming up in the vision, it feels like this ex is like not a very distant ex. Like, it seems like Fret is in love with someone else. And Cal already knows that Fret and Marin they have something going on. And so this just makes him more suspicious of her. But there's not really anything in the vision that he sees that pertains to the specific mission. So he ends up keeping the vision to himself because he's like, well, her personal life is none of my business. Now that I know that she's not betraying us, like, I'm just not going to mention it. And shortly after this, the crew gets to Mercana, and Marin and Sayre, they go to scope out the area and just kind of like see what they're going to be dealing with when they actually do the mission. Sarah stops at a little shop and picks up a circlet that she purchases, and we later find out it's the Circle of Suresh. And so this is actually a KOTOR reference, which is that's pretty cool. So like if you ever played KOTOR before, then you'll probably be familiar with this item where it enhances the light side powers of whoever's wearing it. Based on the way that this relic works, it only enhances light side powers. It doesn't work on dark side. So Sarah purchases it and takes it with her and is going to keep it for safekeeping. Later on, she does explain to Cal why it's important, because at first Cal's kind of like, okay, why do we need that? Because Sarah, it sounds like, doesn't have any plans to actually use it. But this is where she explains to him that, like, I'm trying to set up a legacy. I'm trying to set up like a history of the Jedi. So that way, any people in the future who might be able to learn from the Jedi's teachings, they have something that they can refer back to. This relic is just like one piece of Sarah's overall vision that she has. So once the mission actually is now happening, Cal, Marin, and Fret, they're going to go through the gate, and Fret opens the gate for them with access codes that she has. And right after she opens the gate, Sarah is on the comm back at the ship, and Sarah tells them, hey, Fret shouldn't have been able to open that because those codes were changed this morning. And so now when I read this, I was like, the other shoe's dropping. I knew it was coming. The other shoe is dropping now. And immediately Marin starts trying to defend Fret to Cal because of course when Sarah tells Cal that, Cal is like, I'm done here. Like I knew it. I'm done here. And Marin immediately starts trying to defend Fret to Cal. And we see a flashback at this point of Marin being told by Fret that Fret actually never left the Empire. So Marin knew that Fret had the codes. For me, I didn't understand why Fret didn't just explain this to all of them, like from the start. Like, hey, technically I'm still in the Empire system, so I have the codes, like just FYI, but like I want to leave the Empire. I don't know. Like, I don't get why Fret didn't explain this and why everybody waited until in the middle of a very, very high stakes mission to explain this. And this is where Marin and Fret, they were losing me at this point. Marin has known this girl for like, I don't know, a day, 2 days maybe. And she's putting the word of this person who she does not know above the rest of her crew who they have proven time and time again that they are loyal to each other. They're not going to backstab each other. That's the people you can count on as your crew. Fret, you don't know if you can count on her. You just met her. Why is it that you're putting Fret's claims above the safety of the crew? And also, them finding out in the middle of the mission that Fret had the access code still, I mean, that really could have messed up the mission in like a big way. Like, that could have been catastrophic if they found that out at like a slightly more inconvenient time. Just felt like Fret to me like seemed like very, very much like only interested in like her own sort of like self advancement. But anyway, so that was my Fret frustration. But after this, even though Cal finds out the truth, like there's no time to get into it. Like they're in the middle of this mission right now. They gotta keep going. Just talk about it later, I guess. After all that happens, they get in there, fight their way through the prison. They end up finding the shroud, and they find out that it's actually not the schematics of the shroud that's waiting for them. It's actually a person, and the person is the ex-girlfriend that Cal saw in his vision, and her name is Iray. And Fret is shocked to see Iray, and we do find out that that is genuine. Fret had no idea that it would actually be Iray, and up until this point, Fret thought that she was dead. This is when Marin realizes that she let Fret in way too fast, and I was like, okay, thank God. The other shoe dropped. Like, I was just awaiting. Like, I just hate that feeling so much of when you're reading and you're like, I know it's coming. I know it's coming. I know something is coming and I don't know what, but I can tell it's coming and it just drives you crazy. This is how I was feeling every time Fret opened her mouth. They decide that they have to bring Iray with them. They really have no choice because Iray does have the information for the shroud and, you know, they don't want to leave her in an Imperial prison. So she has to come with them. So now it's Cal, Marin, Fret, and Iray all trying to get out. And during this time, at one point, Cal and Marin, they go off to the side to have a conversation about what they're going to do with Iray. And during that, Iray and Fret just like run off and disappear. So Cal and Marin are now like, okay, well, we have no idea where they went. The Empire is probably going to catch them because like, it's just them 2 versus everybody else. So now we just gotta, like, fight our way out of here and just hope for the best, I guess. And as they're fighting their way out, Marin does use a really cool power where she resurrects some dead people to help them fight, which that's just so Lord of the Rings. I just love it. This is kind of like what I was mentioning earlier when I was talking about the dynamic between the 2 of them, where she has a thought where she feels like Cal must think that she's so horrible for doing something like that, but when you get inside of Cal's head, he doesn't think that she's horrible at all. He's like, wow, that was crazy. Like, but it worked. So, I mean, he has no complaints really. And I think that when Marin assumes that her and Cal are just like so vastly different, I think that her assumption is wrong. Like, I think that he kind of understands her more than she really even realizes at this point. And then the Inquisitor shows up, and things really start to go downhill on this mission at this point. So, of course, the Inquisitor nearly kills Cal because, I mean, that's a tough match to overcome an Inquisitor. And right in the nick of time, Sarah shows up and fights the Inquisitor. She gets the upper hand on the Inquisitor, but instead of finishing him off and killing him, which I feel like is what she should have done, she instead starts trying to convert him. And it's like, you're not going to convert this guy. Like, please just kill him because you're making a bigger problem for everybody else. And she does have to face the consequences of her actions because back at the ship, Grease can tell that something is wrong because they're not back yet. And so Grease actually leaves the ship and goes to intervene in this fight. And when he walks in on Sarah trying to convert the Inquisitor, and the Inquisitor gets away from Sarah and is about to kill Cal, and Grease puts himself between Cal and the Inquisitor. And he saves Cal's life by doing that, but he does lose his arm in the process. And right after this, when they all get back to the ship, I mean, they barely escaped with their lives. And thank God that Iray and Fret are also back at the ship as well. So they did end up pulling it off, but they did make a huge sacrifice, which is that Grease is now severely injured. And even though he does live through his injuries, he is missing an arm. And that's like, of course, like a huge lifestyle adjustment that he has to face now. He is their pilot, and now his flying is going to be greatly affected by this. And it's all because Sarah couldn't actually do what needed to be done in the moment. And Sarah does feel a lot of regret about that. And she recognizes the consequences of her actions of it's kind of interesting because it's like if you're going to abstain from violence in those moments, like, it sounds like that's the right thing to do, but actually it wasn't the right thing to do because it risked the lives of her whole crew because she was trying to do that. In that moment, if she had taken his life, the Inquisitor's life, then Grease wouldn't have nearly died. Cal wouldn't have nearly died. Like, that situation could have just so easily, like, gone so much worse that it was just kind of like an interesting way of looking at like sometimes like you do just need to finish the guy off. Like, sorry. And then so after this big old mess, they force Fret to talk. They're like, you better start talking right now. Where once again, this is another situation with Fret where they're only getting more information from her because she was forced to give it. Like, she's not giving it voluntarily. And Fred explains that Iray is her ex, which is what Cal saw in the vision, confirms that she really did believe that Iray was dead, which is the truth. And we also find out that there's a lot of difficult emotions surrounding that relationship still because Fret blames herself for Iray being put in an imperial prison. What happened between them was that Fret was somewhat force sensitive, not force sensitive enough to be like Jedi level, but enough to where the Empire would have killed her if they knew. And so Fret was trying to shield her from that. But in her attempts to hide her, she accidentally drew more attention to Iray. And so Iray still ended up being caught by the Imperials. And once that happened, Fret thought that Iray was dead. And once they all get away from that mission and they all have like a minute to think, what ends up happening is this tension that has been slowly building amongst the crew over the course of the book, it all kind of comes to a boiling point and they all get in a huge fight about the way that that mission went. They're all blaming each other for various things that went wrong in the mission. And it's just becoming very clear that a lot of them do not have the same goals anymore. Just kind of like this same sort of theme that's been going through the book of like, each one of them is now starting to want something different. And they're starting to feel like there's different ways of going about getting what they want. So there's just a lot of disagreements that are happening, and they're deep seated disagreements as well. We're kind of left with this big question of like, are they going to be able to work it out or not? Like, because it's really starting to seem like they might have like irreconcilable differences. But what they decide to do is they go to Zamara, which is a pit stop that they've made in the past, and they're all going to kind of get some space from each other, think about stuff, try to get their heads back on, and then whoever wants to come back to the ship at the end of this time is going to come back. And so we see them all go their separate directions, and us as the reader, we really don't know who's going to come back. While they're all separated, Cal and Sarah do have a conversation, like a private conversation without the rest of the crew. They talk about what, as Jedi, they envision for the crew and kind of like the direction that they want to see things go in. And this is where we get further confirmation that Cal and Sarah view this situation very differently. Cal, his views haven't changed. They've stayed the same from the very beginning, which is that anything we can do to make things harder for the Empire, we should do that. Sarah, though, is more concerned with building that legacy, creating a resource for people who might want to learn from the teachings of the Jedi so that way the wisdom of the Jedi can still survive through time, even if the Jedi themselves do not. In this conversation, they never really come to an agreement. Like the conversation ends with them still being very much on different sides. However, they do both agree that we're just going to have to handle this piece by piece. We're not going to get this all resolved today. We just need to take it one step at a time and we will deal with these issues as they arise. We also see that Fret and Marin talk, and they kind of talk about like the state of what happened between them and their relationship, and they end that conversation deciding to be friends. And during that conversation, Fret does mention that it seems like something is going on between Cal and Marin, so I do think that there is a possibility that that romance could still happen in the future, even though it didn't happen in this book. So I'm holding out hope. And during that time, Grease also seeks medical attention, which is good. And at the end of that time, everybody gets everything worked out that they needed to work out, and everybody does end up coming back to the ship. But the last thing that they have to do is they need to take care of Karis because he's expecting them to come back with the shroud. And they've decided that they don't want him to have Iray. Like, they don't want to just turn Iray over to him, but they've got to go do something because if they don't, then he's going to come looking for them. So they got to deal with him in some way. So they're going to go, and Iray makes like a fake shroud. Like she creates like a little, it's like a dummy little like chip thingy that she's going to give him. So that way, like hopefully they can give it to him. And by the time he realizes it's fake, like they're already gone. But when they get there, they realize that it's a trap. And the Haxian brood is actually there too, because the Haxian brood and Karis are involved with each other, and Karis has also decided that it's more profitable for him now to actually invest in the Empire instead of investing in the rebellion. So he's just like completely changed his whole position. And also at the same time, the fifth brother shows up because there was a tracking device on Iray. So like pretty much everybody who you don't want to show up is all showing up here at the same time. And it's a big old mess. And you're left wondering, how are they going to pull this off? Like, how are they going to get out of this? Well, thank God that Iray is like a whiz when it comes to tinkering with tech stuff, because she's able to, like, while everybody else is fighting, she's able to kind of like throw together a bomb on the fly using the fake dummy shroud that she made, throws it, and that does, like, it disrupts everything enough for everybody to be able to get out. Also, during that whole scuffle, the Inquisitor did kill Karis as well. So, thankfully, those problems are solved for the time being, at least. And they escape. Everybody's okay, even though Fret did have a close call and, like, almost died at one point. She's gonna be okay. And once they get back to the ship, they decide that Fret and Iray, they're going to be dropped off somewhere else and they're going to kind of go off on their own. When I learned that, I was like, thank God, because could you imagine how much torture that would be if they stayed with the crew and Marin had to like live with them like 24/7? Like I was like, please don't do that to Marin. Like please just go somewhere else. When they decide that they're going to go their separate ways, Iray does also inform them that the shroud isn't going to happen. Like she said that even the process of making the dummy shroud was so complicated that she's realizing that the technology for the shroud just isn't there yet. And so she's not even going to put the resources into actually creating it because the technology's not there, and also because it sounds like it's kind of too dangerous of a thing to like put out into the world anyway. So, I mean, I feel like that probably was the right decision to just not go down that route. And at the end of the book, Cal also does have the realization that one day, like, this crew, it is going to change. So, like, even though right now they're still ending the story still in a very similar position as they were at the start of the story, they all are much more at peace with the fact that like one day this is all going to change. And even though like we're always going to be each other's family, we might not be continuing to go about things the same way that we're doing now for much longer. So you're still like at the end of the book, you are left with the sense of like they're good for now, but there's no telling how long it's going to last. And they still have a lot of love in their hearts for each other, but they do have sort of like a newfound recognition of the fact that they do want different things, and that's okay. And like once it no longer makes sense for them to be fighting together anymore, then they will have to go their separate ways. But yeah, so that is Jedi Battle Scars. I will say that overall I had so much fun with this book. I just fell more and more in love with Cal like throughout the whole story. And even though there were like some points in the story where Marin was kind of losing me, and even though Fret like never really won me over, those things like they didn't interfere with like the fun that I had with reading the book. So many of these characters are just so lovable and they're just easy to connect with the way that Sam Maggs wrote the novel and the way that she gets into the characters' heads. But let me know what you thought of this one, especially if you played the game. I'd be interested to hear like how you feel about the characters, how they're portrayed in the game versus how they're portrayed in the book. If you felt like it was the same or if there were any differences for you. And this book, it did leave me wondering kind of like what we're going to be seeing in Jedi Survivor as well. Like it makes me wonder if we are going to be seeing the end of the group in Jedi Survivor or if they're still going to be kind of going through things as they have been. I don't know, like, I feel like this book left it kinda open-ended where when we start Jedi Survivor, I feel like there's a couple of different things that we could see happen, so we'll just have to see, like, what direction they decide to take it in. I would say my theory, though, based on the way that they set it up in the book, I guess my theory is that at the end of Jedi Survivor, we might see the crew decide to go their separate ways. I almost kind of don't want that to happen because I love them as a group, but also the way that their different goals were set up in this book. It wouldn't be a shocker to me if they do decide to go their separate ways. But let me know what you expect to see in Jedi Survivor if you think any of those threads are going to be picked up on. But thanks so much for watching, guys, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, y'all.